Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
A dull thump sounded by Konoha's main gate as Naruto casually dropped his travel pack. Dirt kicked up in a cloud, coating his sandals and mid-calf high bandages in a thin layer of grime. He didn't much care as he lowered himself to the ground, leaning his head back against the hardwood of the massive gate and closed his eyes in thought. "Meet at the north gate at 9 o'clock sharp," Yamato had said. "We have a joint mission. Pack for 2 weeks' worth of travel." The Jonin hadn't said anything more the previous day, preferring instead to vanish in the standard Konoha Shunshin. Naruto had shaken his head in light frustration while Kiba and Ino had walked off in their almost daily huff, not bothering to wait for the Jinchuriki. Such had become the habit of Team 10. Ever since the argument between him and his team, the less mature members in his opinion, both Kiba and Ino had taken to ostracizing him as much as they could. They had decided that not speaking to him for the most part and leaving practice without him were their best courses of action. Avoiding him outside of team training was easy, and Naruto didn't do too much to bridge the gap, but missions were more difficult. While Yamato had decided, rather wisely, that a C-rank mission outside of the village with the team in such a state would be an altogether bad idea, D-rank missions were far from off-limits. Whereas before the chores had simply been tedious and annoying, now, given the relative tension, they were the mother of all awkwardness for the 12-year-old blonde. Neither of his two teammates talked to him beyond the bare minimum necessary to complete the assigned tasks, and the two left him to do his work on his own. Naruto had taken to using his new clones. The Kage Bunshin was rapidly becoming his favorite technique to get his assigned work done. Fast and easy, Naruto had to wonder how he had ever managed to get D-ranked missions done without the aid of his clones. Of course, Yamato wasn't about to just let him leave after doing his own work, often making the blonde help out his teammates. Ostensibly, it was for the benefit of the team, and the man was looking to rebuild some of the team dynamic Team 10 had possessed before Asuma had died. It didn't work all that well. Rather than building teamwork between the members, the D-ranked missions, specifically Naruto's new and easy way of doing the chores, only served to irritate Kiba and Ino further. Naruto felt like he was on a team with 10-year-olds, rather than the mature ninjas they were supposed to be. Admittedly, Yamato could have done more to build camaraderie between the three pubescent 12-year-olds, but Naruto felt he either couldn't or didn't bother trying. The Genins suspected the former. Being an ANBU, something Naruto was nearly sure that his new sensei had been, didn't exactly promote strong, tight-knit relationships and emotional bonding. Good sensei from a technical standpoint Yamato was, but he wasn't a nurturer by any means. More than ever, Naruto found himself missing the easygoing and fairly transparent nature that Asuma had projected, if for nothing else than to resolve the growing chasm between him and his teammates. Conversely, Yamato was as reserved as any person Naruto had ever met, including Sasuke. His somewhat withdrawn nature didn't endear him to Ino or Kiba, despite his effectiveness as a teacher during their team sessions. While Naruto certainly couldn't claim to be friends with the man, something he could have said with ease about his first sensei, they had a strong working relationship. When Yamato lectured, Naruto listened. When Naruto raised questions, Yamato answered them. They got along as well as any two people in a workplace could. It was clean-cut, efficient, and sterile, filled with none of the easygoing cheer and near-familial bond Naruto had shared with Asuma, but it worked. Despite himself, Naruto found himself content with his relationship with the former ANBU, a sentiment only compounded by his steady growth under the man's tutelage. Yamato could teach, and Naruto was more than happy to learn. Beneath it all, Team 10 splintered. Kiba and Ino would have their petty vendetta while Naruto waited, with growing impatience, for the two to see just how stupid they were being. Sometimes he wondered if it wouldn't be better if they just went their separate ways. The emergence of familiar chakra presences accompanied muted footsteps, drawing Naruto from his reverie. Blue eyes drifted open lazily and Naruto half-turned to see Team 8 walking toward him leisurely. "Ohio, Naruto. Nice look." New, came the familiar greeting of Akimichi Chuji, his usual snacks surprisingly absent. Hube Hinata and Aburame Shino, his two teammates, trailed slightly behind the large boy, Chuji having sped up to reach his old friend. A change in his usual attire explained the boy's greeting. Over his standard green t-shirt he wore a black flak vest, similar to the standard issue green ones worn by Chunin and Jonin in Konoha, that he left unzipped. "Lo, Chuji," was all the blonde said in response, not in the mood for much small talk. Naruto stood fluidly, like the shinobi he was, to greet his old running buddy from the academy. Reaching forward, he grasped his friend's forearm in a standard, customary Akimichi greeting. A smile that was a cross between a grimace and a wince broke across his face as Chuji returned the grip. Tubby bastard always was strong, he thought somewhat fondly, recalling many such greetings. "How's it going?" "Can't complain, I guess." "You?" The blonde shrugged, some of his earlier thoughts returning in spite of Chuji's perpetual cheer. "Good and bad. Learning to just roll with it, I suppose." The smile on the large boy's face dimmed somewhat, no doubt thinking that Naruto was speaking of dealing with Asuma's death. He was, in a way, but certainly not in the way the Akimichi thought. That didn't even begin to cover the rest of the shitstorm of information he was currently dealing with. "How's that going?" Chuji asked sympathetically. Naruto snorted a laugh. "It's going," was all he said. Chuji nodded his acceptance, and Naruto moved past him to greet Shino and Hinata. "Good to see you, Shino, Hinata. It's been a while." Shino nodded briskly, as was his way, while Hinata flushed and averted her eyes to the ground, silently pressing her fingers together as was her way. "Indeed, Naruto-san. My condolences for the loss of your sensei." "Ayano, it is good to see you as well, Naruto-kun." Naruto nodded at the respective greetings, quietly thanking Shino for his sympathy, before moving on to other topics, trying and failing to distract himself. "So, you guys have any idea what, exactly, we're gonna be doing on this mission?" Yamato-sensei wasn't specific. It was Shino who answered. Kurenai-sensei spoke of a search and retrieval mission to the country of rice fields. Increased bandit activity in the area of interest is why additional manpower was requested in the form of an additional genin squad. Naruto nodded as Shino spoke, digesting the dry, yet informative details. "Great," he said dryly, far from enthralled. "What are we retrieving?" "An information packet being delivered by the daimyo of Ricefields men, as per the treaty between our countries." The near-melodious voice of Yuhi Kurenai sounded from behind her genin, causing Chuji and Hinata to jump in surprise. Shino was unaffected, simply turning at the sound of her voice, while Naruto had seen her approach over the heads of Team 8. Two blonde eyebrows rose at the statement. "Isn't that something handled by Chunin and Jonin?" Genin didn't get slotted into missions where any type of sensitive information was being passed. It was too dangerous. Kurenai offered him a reassuring smile, her inky black hair blowing in the slight breeze. "The packet contains nothing sensitive, and is more of a formality to be observed than anything truly necessary." Naruto gave the Jonin a nod before quickly averting his eyes so as to not be caught staring. "You're looking well, Naruto-san." "It's good to see," the pretty Jonin offered, and Naruto flushed involuntarily at her words before giving her a quick smile. The group descended into silence as Kurenai dropped her pack next to Naruto's and moved to make small talk with the two gate guards. The sound of chips being chewed filled the air as Naruto looked about for conversation, all the while not particularly wanting to speak. It was an interesting contradiction. Just as Naruto began to tap his foot, the sound of bickering assaulted his ears, and a sardonic smile found its way to his mouth. "About time you two showed," he quipped blandly, not really irritated. "You're early, we're on time," Ino offered briskly as the two greeted the members of Team 8 with considerably more cheer. "Nice to see you too," Naruto grumbled under his breath. "Yamato here yet?" Kiba grunted after obligatory etiquette had been observed. "No," Naruto returned, a scowl crossing his face as he spied Ino and Chuji in familiar and friendly conversation. He scanned the gathered group. I'd expected he'd be here by now. The blonde trailed off, keen blue eyes finding the form of his sensei causally leaning against the outside of the gate. When did he? Blue eyes met black, and Naruto thought he spied a slight smirk pass over his sensei's face, but it was gone before he could fully make it out. Sly bastard, Naruto thought as he watched Yamato get Kurenai's attention before the two made their way to the assembled genin. As you've been informed, this mission is a C-rank collaboration between teams 8 and 10. Our objective is a standard information packet to be handed over to us just inside the border the country of rice fields. I assume you've each packed for 2 weeks worth of travel? Yamato asked the group, though it wasn't really a question. 6 nods and a few muttered yes met his inquiry. Move out. // The sound of crashing water was all-encompassing, loud to the point of being wince-inducing. Water, brilliantly blue yet clear as the day as it reflected the sun's rays float underfoot, the current unperturbed by the sandals resting atop it. Naruto didn't see the water, however. Neither did he see the myriad of ensnared fish struggling upstream beneath his very feet. He didn't see the sun's refracted rays, somehow managing to create a near rainbow in the thin mist permeating the air halfway across the river into the country of rice fields. Nor did he see the trees extending behind him for miles along the river on which he stood, finally giving away to water and rolling fields and hills. He barely even heard the sound of the awesome waterfall to his left, deafened as he was by the sound of his own heartbeat. All Naruto saw was stone that gave way to a flash of indigo hair and red eyes that inspired both envy and terror in him. Eyes as blue as the water flowing beneath him were locked on the carved face of the man who Uchiha Itachi had warned him of 4, almost 5, he corrected himself, years ago. Uchiha Madara. His hands clenched at his sides unconsciously and his eyes narrowed as his internal equilibrium was disturbed by the swirling, almost nauseating sensation of the Kyuubi's chakra being drawn upon as the name of Naruto's formerly faceless nemesis echoed through his subconscious. The reaction was mostly his, though he suspected that the Kyuubi might have played a small part in the stirring of the pot. The beast could probably be considered the only sentient being in existence that could honestly say that he hated Uchiha Madara more than Naruto did. And Naruto hated him quite a bit. He had been all but responsible for the deaths of both of his parents. Listless blue eyes stared out at the 200-foot-tall cage in front of him, seeing but not truly comprehending the vision before him. Around him, water rippled in great waves and the walls shook as the Kyuubi's mocking laughter erupted, the beast glorifying in the pain it could cause its container. The Yondaime, his father. Naruto could see nothing, could feel nothing in the wake of the information that was as close to earth-shattering as Naruto felt he would ever receive. The Yondaime, the man he had adored for his childhood and hated since he had learned of his burden, was his father. The fact that his mother had been both the last of the once proud Uzumaki clan and the previous container of the Kyuubi was all but shoved to the wayside in the face of his father's identity. Pushed aside in the face of the curse Namake's Minato had given him. Beyond the cage, beyond the swirling water and the miasma of crimson-colored chakra that crashed and broke around and against him, beyond the fox's cruel thundering, one thought penetrated Naruto's mind. Old man, why didn't you tell me? Even now, the thought would echo across his mind every now and then, putting him into a mood of gloom and introspection as he tried to piece together why the old man that he had looked to as a grandfather had withheld information so critical to his identity. He never came up with much, nothing so serious that it would prevent the Sandaime from telling Naruto due to any real danger to him. Needless to say, his teammates on the mission to Rice Field Country had stayed clear of him for the majority of that day. He had gone to the Kyuubi for information on Madara. The fox obviously would have information to yield about a man he had tasked Naruto with killing, to be greeted with the tale of October the 10th 12 years previous. The tale of how Madara, a man with chakra fouler than even my own, the fox had said, had managed to rip the beast from his mother's seal and force it to his will with his Sharingan's trickery, all but killing his mother, Uzumaki Kushina, in the process, before setting it loose on Konoha. The Yondaime, the fox had concluded after some years of thought on the matter, for it hadn't been present, had fought Madara to a standstill before breaking the Uchiha's hold over the beast and sealing it away in Naruto. The fox had been far from pleased to relate the tale of its own imprisonment, but took a vindictive solace in the fact that Naruto felt as much pain as it did at the revelations. Naruto had been all but silent for the day, and his team had been even more skittish around him than normal, correctly sensing his mood and having no wish to tempt the sleeping dragon. Yamato had seemed to ignore the episode for the most part, but Naruto had sensed, when he had bothered to pay attention to those around him, that the man was wary. Not for the first time did Naruto wonder about the man's placement on the team as sensei. Sarutobi was no fool, and it would have made no sense to saddle some jonin, even a former ANBU captain, with a tailed beast container if they would be ill-equipped to deal with it. It was especially so, now that Naruto had accessed the fox's chakra. A flash of red in his peripheral vision sent a shock of terror through him, his body unconsciously associating the color with the famous dojutsu of his Uchiha nemesis. Fight or flight took hold of the blonde for a single second, his brain shooting orders down nerve impulses at the speed of thought. Arm and leg muscles tensed in preparation, and Naruto's right arm twitched in expectation of delivering a jabbing palm strike to his assailant's throat. The motion was never completed, halted in the middle as Naruto realized, belatedly, that the flash of red merely belonged to Yuhi Kurenai's dress, not Uchiha Madara's Sharingan. Get a grip, Naruto, he chastised himself, noting that though the female jonin looked at ease, the tightening around her eyes spoke of her knowledge of his reaction. Both teams are ready to move out, Naruto, she spoke, her soft voice somehow carrying over the roar of the falls. He nodded once, curtly, and turned to follow her back to the small camp the two teams had made just inside the border of Fire Country. The journey from Konoha had been a long one, requiring non-stop running since that morning, and all the genin were in need of a rest to regain their bearings for the rest of the mission. They entered the camp in silence. Naruto's trained eyes quickly locating his teammates and those of Team 8 loitering about a clearing that had been filled, just a few minutes previous, by a good-sized wooden house that Yamato had seen fit to make grow from the ground. The man had apparently decided to rest in style. Naruto had never seen his teammates happier with their sensei than they had been in that moment, though they returned to their usual cold treatment a few minutes later once the novelty had worn off. Yamato himself was packed and ready, standing at the edge of the forested clearing to observe the 5 genin. Naruto spared the man a nod as he passed him, swiftly walking to his pack that was leaned against a tree. The blonde had never bothered to unpack, preferring to relieve himself quickly in the woods before making his way to the valley of the inn to brood. He took up a position next to his sensei and watching the proceedings. The group was ready to move in short order with little fanfare aside from a rather humorous interaction between Kiba and Shino. Just because I employ insect-based techniques, Kiba-san, Shino had patiently explained, does not make me responsible for Akamaru's flea problem. The group stood assembled before the 2 jonin in silence as Yamato addressed them. Our destination lies almost 2 hours to the northwest of here. With any luck, the packet will be delivered on time and we can begin our journey back to Konoha immediately. The meeting's location, sensei? Naruto asked. Yamato gave him a look, and he elaborated, the briefing packet wasn't specific. Shintoshi, Yamato recited blandly. That's Fuma clan territory, Aburame Shino's quiet voice came from the back of the assembled genin. The rest of teams 8 and 10 turned as one to look at him. Naruto squinted in thought, the only Fuma clan he knew of lived in Rain Country. Yamato simply nodded without expression, but Kurenai looked pleased. Yes it is, Shino. The Fuma clan have long been allies of Ricefield's daimyo, and have agreed to provide protection and supervision for our meeting with the daimyo's men. Naruto's eyebrows went to his hairline, but Ino beat him to the punch in asking, is that really necessary, Kurenai-sensei? Her expression was quizzical, belying the calculating mind Naruto knew she had underneath. This is only a C-ranked mission, after all. At her proclamation, Kiba stiffened, while Naruto struggled to look unaffected. His eyes unconsciously flickered to Yamato's, who was staring directly at him with an unfathomable expression in his eyes. The hair on the back of Naruto's neck stood up. Something's wrong here. The blonde barely noticed when Kurenai waved off his teammate's concern. The presence of the clan is simply ceremonial. It has been a tradition since the end of the last war for the Fuma clan to be present at the daimyo's dealings, given the close relationship the two entities share. Team 8 nodded as a whole, accepting their sensei's words without question. Team 10 nodded as well, though all 3 sets of eyes were locked on their sensei. A look of resignation seemed to pass through the man's black orbs for a moment, though it was gone too quickly to be sure. Good then, Kurenai said, clapping once. Shall we? She asked Yamato. The brown-haired Jonin nodded once in response. Let's go. A chorus of yes, sensei, rang out through the clearing as the genin hastened to obey, and the 6 preteens leapt into the trees. Or they would have, had Naruto not taken that moment to trip over an exposed root, falling flat on his stomach in the process before he could catch himself. A round of chuckles greeted his flushed face as he rose, eyes cast downward at the tree root that had tripped him up. He tilted his head quizzically. That wasn't there before, he thought. Glancing up to the still chuckling teams, Naruto made eye contact with his sensei. A smile played about the man's lips, but it stopped a long way before touching his eyes. Naruto knew the man well enough to recognize that the Jonin was all business. Are you quite ready, Naruto? Yamato asked dryly, or do you need a minute to collect yourself? We can wait. The collective gazes of the whole group snapped to the brown-haired Jonin at the sheer novelty of the usually sober man cracking a joke, while Naruto stiffened unconsciously at the feeling of something crawling up his leg. Only his expectation of his sensei sending him a message kept him from crying out in surprise as what felt like a snake slithered up his right leg before depositing something in his pocket. A lightning-fast glance to the ground revealed the root he had tripped over quickly retracting, burying itself in the ground where it had come from, just as he had expected. Blue Eyes sought black once more, but the man was looking to Kurenai now as she gently reprimanded him for making fun of his student. The nearly hidden smile on her face belied her sincerity, however, and the former ANBU captain took his dressing down with the same bland look that he seemed to take everything else with. Kurenai hadn't noticed. Eyes flickering to the 5 other faces in the squad, Naruto found nothing out of the ordinary, and the Hyuga didn't have her Byakugan engaged. Less than 3 seconds gone, a message passed, and no one knows a thing, Naruto marveled, his respect for Yamato going up a notch. His hand drifted to his right pocket, where he casually felt what seemed to be paper stuffed inside. He refrained from raising an eyebrow. The man could bend wood to his will, and paper was made from trees after all. A scant 3 minutes later found Naruto in the trees, taking up the rear of the group as they left the site of the Valley of the End in their wake. It wasn't hard for the blonde to surreptitiously remove the paper Yamato had passed him without the notice of the rest of the group, positioned as he was. Blue Eyes scanned the note quickly. Instead of writing with ink, the paper looked to have pieces cut out of it in the shape of letters. Naruto squinted slightly, as the weird letters took some adjustment of the eyes to read properly. They formed a concise list. Information Packet Objective. Retrieved from Fuma Contact. Otogakure no Sato, new. It said nothing more, but Naruto knew enough to put the pieces together. Despite being labeled as a simple C-rank retrieval mission, the joint effort was simply a cover for the 2 Jonin, probably Yamato specifically, to collect some form of information on Otogakure no Sato, some new village. Whatever it was that was being retrieved, it was obviously sensitive enough for the Hokage to devise a cover for it. The old man didn't want this new village to know about Konoha's espionage. Beyond that, the fact that it was entrusted to a former ANBU captain spoke volumes about how potentially important this information was. A spark of frustration and anger rushed through him at the knowledge of the secret mission. His team had been victim of a mislabeled mission once before, with deadly consequences. That he and his team were being thrown into the line of fire again, this time with the Hokage's full knowledge, nearly made him scream at the unfairness of it all. But isn't that what being a ninja is all about? A small, traitorous part of his brain supplied. Wasn't that exactly what Asuma had been warning him about back in Wave? About how mission objectives wouldn't always be defined, how information would be limited, and how he would have to adapt and deal with it in order to stay alive as a Chunin and Jonin, let alone be successful. Yes, he decided, this is exactly what Asuma-sensei was talking about. Life wasn't fair, especially for a ninja. Naruto knew this better than anyone given his upbringing, yet he allowed himself to fall into the same line of thinking as his teammates, allowing himself petulant reactions in situations that, while indeed unfair, couldn't be changed, and where complaining did no one any good. That couldn't happen, that wouldn't happen. Not anymore. Bitching about his situation hadn't gotten him anywhere as a child, and he had accepted that and learned to live with it. He'd do the same here. He couldn't say anything without blowing the mission's cover to Team 8. All he could do was be as ready as physically possible, and be prepared to carve up any Otonin who happened to cross paths with their group. He sped up briefly, passing Yamato's note to Kiba and giving the Inuzuka a tap on the shoulder to let him know. His teammates, at least, deserved to know, and he doubted that Yamato would have expected the information to be kept from them anyway. Once sure of the dog ninja's awareness, Naruto dropped back, adjusting his weapons pouches and readying his knives. // The group of Konoha ninja didn't reach Shintoshi until it was nearly nightfall, at which time they were invited to dinner at the expense of the Fuma clan head, a man ever eager to impress his guests. Yamato had looked ready to immediately refuse the kind offer, obviously in a hurry to get whatever information the Hokage was to receive from the clan back to Konoha as quickly as possible. But the genin weren't trained for operating on zero rest. It had been a long journey for the genin, and each of them was quite ready for some rest before setting off the next morning. And it wasn't as if Yamato had any real excuse to leave, given that this was supposed to be just an average C-rank mission and he wasn't about to blow the real mission's cover. Kurenai's logic had won out in the end. They were surrounded by friendly clan members and in friendly territory. It would be better to rest sooner, rather than have to stop in the middle of their journey back to deal with a genin who happened to pass out due to lack of rest. The former ANBU wasn't too happy with the decision, but refrained from showing his displeasure. It was clear enough to most, however, that the man was on edge, and they steered clear of the jonin for the night. Dinner was an altogether pleasant affair, with the clan head, Hanzaki, treating the Konoha ninjas to what was far closer to a feast than a regular dinner. The man apparently wanted to show off, and the Konoha genin were far from complaining at the ridiculous amount of food in front of them. Shoji, especially, had enjoyed himself. For Naruto, though, the entire affair was an exercise in trying his limited patience. As he had expected would happen, Kiba had immediately passed the note Yamato had made off to Ino. What the blonde hadn't expected, though he probably should have in retrospect, were the reactions his two teammates would have to the thought of a secondary mission beyond their own. Instead of coming to the conclusion that the Hokage obviously had his reasons for sending their team, specifically Yamato, to retrieve covert information, the less mature thirds of Team 10 unanimously decided that the whole situation was far too familiar to the botched mission in Wave, and that it was all Yamato's fault. The latest bout of wisdom from the dynamic duo saw Kiba and Ino cornering Yamato immediately when the two teams broke for a few minutes of rest, with a hushed shouting match and a severe dressing down following shortly afterwards. It was only Naruto's fast talking to Kurenai and the pretty Jonin's ability to run interference with her own team that prevented the entire mission from being aired right then and there. Naruto wondered at the futility of it all. Sure, people would believe what they wanted to believe, and there was no way that Team 8 would have had any inkling of a different, covert mission, but the three genin weren't stupid. They would start suspecting something at some point, Shino at least was perceptive, and then the whole mission would be blow open. Needless to say, Naruto had received a dressing down of his own once Yamato had made sure that Kiba and Ino weren't about to defect. Apparently he hadn't been supposed to share Yamato's information with his team. And used to being in the wrong, the whole scene had screamed unfairness at Naruto, but he had swallowed his displeasure. He didn't have to like it, however. At length, he found himself holed away in a corner of the clan head's house, a rather large building in the very center of Shintoshi, reading through the earth manipulation section of the scrolls that Asuma had given him before the wave mission. He remembered the first stages of his wind training under the dead Jonin with nothing even close to familiar fondness, and had hoped that he would have to do nothing more involving leaves. The scroll said differently, and Naruto added it to the growing list of frustrations that the mission was heralding. Yamato and Kurenai were talking quietly with Hanzaki, though Naruto couldn't hear what was being said from his position. He suspected it had to do with the mission, but couldn't be sure. Yamato had conveniently disappeared for a few minutes before dinner, and had returned far more at ease than he had seemed before. It wasn't something noticed by one who wasn't looking for it, but Naruto had been paying special attention to both Jonin ever since Yamato had told him about the real mission. A slight ease in the shoulders, less tightness around the eyes, fewer discreet glances about, small and unnoticeable under normal circumstances, but the circumstances weren't normal, and Naruto wasn't a normal genin. The whole thing seemed suspicious, and led Naruto to believe that the necessary information was not being delivered with the daimyo's men, as he had thought before, and was retrieved instead by a separate contact inside the clan. The blonde admitted to himself that he could be wrong in his assumption, but felt that after a month and a half of quietly observing his new sensei that he could pick up a few of the man's idiosyncrasies. Yamato hadn't seemed half as relaxed the entire trip, even when the samurai had hand-delivered their packet to him, and the genin couldn't think of any other reason why the man might be so now. Thoughts of his enigmatic sensei flew from his mind as a blue and orange blob shaped like a human dropped itself next to him. Blue Eyes turned from his elemental scroll to the blob, only to realize that the blob was in fact a girl around his age, with burnt orange hair and a navy blue bodysuit. Brown Eyes peeked out from a soft, rounded face curiously, staring at his scroll intently. He snapped it shut. "Can I help you?" Naruto asked in his best polite voice, even as the girl turned her eyes to him with mild annoyance. "No," she said after a pause. Her voice was harder than Naruto had expected, having pegged her to be about his age, but carried an undercurrent of something that the boy couldn't quite place. "Well, all right then," the blonde thought with a bit of wonder. He reopened his scroll, this time trying to actually get some reading done rather than muse about the mission, and was unsurprised when the orange-haired girl didn't move, but instead returned her eyes to the Earth manipulation text. The simplest of exercises for students of Earth manipulation is the leaf-crushing exercise. Similar to its counterparts, leaf splitting, burning, and shattering, the exercise is designed to force the student to become in tune with the nature chakra. With earth manipulation, it is important for the student to attempt to crush the leaf, not with pure chakra pressure alone, but by allowing the life energy to seep into the leaf and force it to crumble, rather than do so from the outside. Ironically, this exercise is most similar to the leaf shattering technique, its lightning nature counterpart, despite being elemental opposites. Naruto was drawn from his reading as the orange-haired girl's head drifted closer to his as he unconsciously moved the scroll to his right, further away from her. The genin looked to her sharply and met Brown Eyes once more before they glanced away, a faint blush marring pale cheeks. "Can I help you?" he asked once more, foregoing bluntness and ignoring the "what the hell do you want" that was begging to be asked. He normally wouldn't have bothered, but, like most boys his age, he had a soft spot for cute females who smelled nice. "You can move your scroll to the left some." The Uzumaki shrugged and obliged her. It wasn't like she was really disrupting him. She was merely curious. It was understandable, he felt, given that the Fuma clan wasn't in possession of many ninjutsu, or so he had learned. The guards at the entrance to the compound had carried bows and arrows in addition to the standard kunai and shuriken, and he knew for a fact that Hanzaki usually toted a zanbatsu on his back. The evidence pointed to a clan of shinobi far more focused on taijutsu and weapons rather than ninjutsu, something so far from the norm in Konoha that Naruto had a hard time imagining what it must have been like. "Your clan doesn't have much in the way of ninjutsu," he probed, though it was more of a statement than a question. "No." Naruto bit down on his frustration at the intransigent girl, allowing a sigh to escape his lips and nothing more. He hadn't had to deal with people refusing to talk to him for years, since he had started taking his academy time seriously, and consequently hadn't been forced to wheedle information from unwilling sources for quite some time. That didn't mean he couldn't dust off his skills, however, though they would likely need a bit of a tune-up. He doubted that the girl would react well to a combination of puppy dog eyes and incessant hollering. "Yes, I guessed as much," he began, shrugging off the one-word answer like it hadn't frustrated him in the slightest. The bows and arrows were a bit of a tip-off, to be honest. Not many ninja carry them these days. "I suppose not." "Right. Well, you see, that got me thinking. Maybe a clan of weapons specialists? I thought, but that didn't make much sense. Not in this day and age." He had her full attention now, though from how her eyes tracked down the scroll and finally stopped, it was most likely because she had finished reading what Naruto had left open and didn't want to ask him to open the scroll further. "I did some reading about the Fuma clan back home and didn't come up with much outside of Rain Country. I figure you guys must be some offshoot that happened along the way that got kicked out or something." He trailed off, ostensibly because, were he genuinely rambling, he would have just realized that he had probably just insulted every fiber of familial pride the girl possessed. She didn't disappoint. Brown eyes glared into his blue harshly, and when the girl opened her mouth her voice was just as barbed, though still quiet. "I'll thank you not to call my clan a family of bastards," she hissed. "Ah, I'm so sorry," Naruto exclaimed, hands held up in surrender. "I didn't mean to insult you. I'm just curious as to why your clan doesn't seem to have much in the way of ninjutsu," he said contritely. "That's all." "Maybe because we specialize in something else," the girl asked sarcastically. "Outside of Sunegakure's puppet brigade, we're the foremost specialists in chakra threads," she said, her voice filled with pride. "And here we go," Naruto thought with satisfaction. "Really?" he questioned. He didn't have to reach far for real interest. "I'm not familiar with, how'd you call it?" "Chakra threads," the girl said, almost patiently now that she had calmed down. "It's a technique that's most used by puppet users these days to control their puppets from a distance." "But that's not what you guys do," Naruto surmised quickly. The orange-haired girl smirked. "Oh, we do," she said, gesturing to Naruto's arm. When the blonde looked down, she jerked her hand back towards herself, pulling Naruto's arm with her even though she didn't once touch it. Despite retaining all feeling in the limb, the arm moved like dead weight as it was pulled across the girl's body, Naruto not far behind as he landed in her lap with a strangled gasp. A flush crept up his neck as he righted himself after the girl, he still didn't know her name, released her technique. He noticed with some small mortification that the incident had caught the attention of the entire room. The clan head, Hanzaki, was staring at him with a single eyebrow raised, while both Yamato and Kurenai mirrored him. Shoji looked amused while Shino remained impassive. Naruto couldn't be sure, it was so hard to tell with the Hyuga eyes the way they were, but it seemed almost as if Hinata was glaring at the orange-haired girl. Ino's glare was far easier to see, and Kiba looked to be fighting a smile with great effort. "Yes, well," the girl continued once the room had returned to normal. "We do use the threads like puppeteers sometimes, but mostly for thrown weapons and the like." "Makes those bows and arrows a bit more dangerous," Naruto mused, his embarrassment sufficiently squashed. "Oh, yeah," the girl said with a prideful smirk. "You guys do anything else with those threads?" the blonde genin probed, fully interested in a technique that was quite obviously dangerous. "This and that." She shrugged. Naruto nodded. Whatever else the clan did was not likely to be revealed by anyone, least of all this girl. The blonde sat back against the wall once more, satisfied with the information he had managed to get. Though he still had some questions. Still, does it really make sense for a clan to be so devoted to one tiny branch of the ninja arts? The girl shrugged again. "I guess not," she said at length. She didn't seem too happy about the logic. "We're trying to expand some, though. We're pretty close to a deal with some local ninja that would really help us move in some new directions. Sasami, the deep voice of the clan leader, cut into the conversation from across the room. "The Konoha ninja need to be shown to their lodgings for the night. They have a long journey in the morning, so let's leave them to their business." As he spoke, 3 bow-wielding clansmen entered the room and gestured to the Konoha ninja to gather their belongings. The girl, Sasami, rose. "Yes, uncle," she demurred before turning back to Naruto. "I didn't catch your name." Naruto grinned as he gathered his pack. "Didn't think I dropped it," he said roguishly. It managed to draw a smile from the girl, and his grin widened. "Uzumaki Naruto," he introduced himself, holding a hand out. She took it. "Fuma Sasami. It was good to meet you, Naruto." "And you, Sasami," he said as the orange-haired girl was led from the room by her uncle. Maybe they would be able to continue their conversation the next morning before the Konoha group left. She had been interesting. He would never see her alive again. // It was the feel of pressurized chakra being let go that had woken him, split seconds before Yamato's voice sounded. "Get up! All of you!" Naruto sprang upward, vaulting from his prone position to a crouch, a kunai clenched in his right fist. Blue eyes darted around the darkened room that was shared by teams 8 and 10, taking in the still groggy forms of his counterparts, though he couldn't tell with Shino, the boy wore sunglasses even to bed. Two people were missing, however. Naruto's eyes met Yamato's, and the Jonin held up a hand to ward off his unspoken question as he waited for the others to shake off the effects of sleep. Yamato? Kurenai questioned a few seconds later, after her team had shaken a bit of their grogginess away. My clone was pulling guard duty with Kiba and Ino when a cloaking genjutsu was laid over the area. It was broken, but not before my clone was dispatched. This was 57 seconds ago. Since then, I've dispatched the two shinobi that were most likely sent to kill us. I've also learned that Hanzaki and his immediate family have been murdered. The same is happening throughout the entire clan compound. This is a purge, the Jonin finished monotonously. What are we supposed to do? Choji exclaimed in a panic. All three Team 8 genin looked terrified out of their wits, even Shino. Naruto felt he probably didn't look much different. Quiet, Choji. Kurenai ordered, silencing her whole team. She turned to Yamato. Well, take your team and Naruto directly out of the town and lead them to the border. I will track down Ino and Kiba. It went unspoken that both groups would have to fight their way out. Sensei-Naruto began. Naruto, this is not the time for a discussion. You will follow Kurenai's lead with Team 8 to the border. No exceptions. The former ANBU captain stared down his best student with emotionless eyes as he passed a small scroll to Kurenai. Naruto's eyes hardened and he nodded once, curtly. The former ANBU captain was in charge here, and he would follow his lead. He opened his mouth to reply, but the man was already gone, having wasted too much time briefing the group already. Kiba and Ino might have already been killed. Get a hold of yourself, Naruto, he screamed mentally. Fatalistic thoughts never helped anyone, especially not in these types of situations. Gear up, Kurenai was saying. But pack nothing besides the essentials. This is a mad dash, so we can't have anything slowing us down. But what about Yamato as sensei? Hinata stuttered. Yamato is former ANBU. He can take care of himself, Hinata, the red-eyed Jonin said gently, soothing the nearly hysterical girl. I'll need you at your best right now, Hinata. We need to be able to see what's around us. Can you do that? Some distant part of Naruto's mind marveled at how calm the pretty Jonin was in the situation, but most of him was itching to get the hell out of Dodge. He had gathered his essentials precious seconds before, and his right foot tapped incessantly with impatience even as he gripped his twin-knuckle knives. See 'em on, see 'em on, see 'em on. Let's go already, he thought savagely as Team 8 rushed to retrieve their weapons. This was why he always kept them in a neat pile less than a foot from where he slept, if not on his person. Yes, sensei, Hinata demurred at last, though she didn't sound confident in herself. Good girl. Kurenai surveyed the group, all of them finally ready to move out. Let's move out. It was the quietest war zone Naruto thought that he would ever stumble into, even after Kurenai had dispelled the residual cloaking genjutsu. Whereas not a sound could be heard before, nearly silent footsteps made by invisible enemies echoed into the night, and the sound of brief weapon clashes became deafening before halting abruptly. Shino, Choji, take the rear. Naruto and I will be our front with Hinata in the middle, Kurenai hissed. The genin obeyed silently. Hinata, your eyes. The timid heiress brought her hands together in a seal. Byakugan, she whispered, as veins bulged around her pupil-less eyes. They widened almost immediately. Sensei, she began, but Kurenai and Naruto were already moving. Naruto broke left as Kurenai vaulted back over the top of her genin, both reaching their would-be assassins before the words were out of Hinata's mouth. Naruto lowered himself under an outstretched stab, letting momentum carry himself into his attacker. He lowered his shoulder at the last moment and lifted, changing the man's direction and flipping him bodily over his head before the black-clad assailant could so much as react. The man landed with a thud, but Naruto paid no heed as his disruptive wind chakra erupted into 4-foot blades. Taking 2 quick steps forward, Naruto brought both arms across his body in an X shape at eye level. The elemental chakra did the work for him, as a similarly black-clad man dropped to the ground with his head neatly removed. The genin juked to his right to avoid the downward slash of a katana that would have left him bleeding out, before blasting forward in a mini shunshin. Wind parted flesh like a hot knife through butter as Naruto ran through the sword-wielding ninja, piercing both kidneys, and the blonde met the dying man's eyes with a snarl as he viciously removed the weapons. Naruto turned back to the group to see Kurenai with her hands in a seal, staring intently at the man Naruto lifted over himself at the start, her own two opponents dead from multiple wounds from a kunai and lying under the overhang on which they had likely been perched when the genin exited the building. The jonin's eyes became unfocused for a brief second before she released the hand seal. The man wobbled unsteadily for a moment, before Kurenai casually cut his throat with a kunai. He gurgled for a moment before dropping like a puppet with its strings cut, the stench of released bowels filling the air. Near silence reigned for a moment while the three genin of Team 8 took in the sight of casual brutality, the stillness only punctuated by soft footsteps coming from multiple locations around them. "Get a hold of yourselves," the red-eyed jonin commanded, addressing her stunned team. "This is the life of a ninja, so you'd better get used to it quickly. All of you need to be at your best if we're to survive." All three nodded shakily, still stunned by the unheralded attack and its even briefer ending. "Good. Hinata," the man indicated that their forces are less concentrated to the north. "I need you to verify that." Why yes, sensei." The Hyuga bloodline activated once more, and the heiress nodded. "There are fewer M-men to the north, sensei." "Good work, Hinata," Kurenai praised gently. "I need you to keep your eyes activated for me, Hinata." "Can you do that?" "Yes, sensei." No more was said as the group rounded the corner of what had been their lodging in the Fuma clan compound, and onto Fuma Lane, the main road that bisected the town. Naruto and Kurenai led the five-man team at a brisk jog, eyes peeled for lurking enemies. Unconsciously, Naruto was reminded of the night that had changed his entire outlook on shinobi life all those years ago. He wondered if it had been this quiet when Uchiha Itachi had eradicated the Uchiha from the face of the earth. His thoughts were shattered as Hinata called out, "Sensei," in quiet distress, and indicated two alleys that the group would pass in a few seconds before holding up 8 fingers. Naruto and Kurenai exchanged a glance and a nod, and the blonde genin steeled himself even as the sound of his own heartbeat filled his ears. A single knuckle knife was sheathed briefly as Naruto coded and hurled a wind-enhanced kunai to his right, into one of the two alleys. The blade's aim was true, and it entered one shinobi's chest cavity before brutally exiting the other side before any of the assassins had time to react. Before the remaining Otonin could comprehend that their teammate was dead, Naruto had used his chakra as an anchor and kawarimi'd with the kunai into the center of the alley. Wind chakra exploded down the length of his former sensei's knives into 6-foot scalpels that bent like whips. Capitalizing on his opportunity, Naruto spun 360 degrees in the blink of an eye, his whip-like blades eviscerating and bisecting the unsuspecting shinobi as the wind roared its fury for a single moment before falling silent as Naruto fell to one knee to maintain his balance. A second kawarimi with his kunai carried him back to his original position before the top halves of the dead Oto ninjas hit the ground. 4 thuds echoed behind Naruto, but he was already sprinting toward the opposite alley to assist Kurenai. The red-eyed jonin had only 2 men left to deal with, and saw his approach from over the shoulder of one of her attackers. Swiftly, she thrust-kicked him into Naruto's path before dropping low to sweep the feet of her final opponent. The man hit the ground hard with a muffled groan before he was silenced by a well-placed kunai. Naruto quickly reversed his momentum, allowing his body to better catch the airborne shinobi. Grabbing hold of the flying ninja, the blonde placed a hand over his mouth to muffle him before slitting his throat. The cooling corpse dropped like a sack as Naruto released him. Twin Shunshins carried the genin and jonin back to the front of their 5-man team, who stood arrayed back-to-back in anticipation of another attack. Even as the three prepared for assault, their eyes were wide with shock at the brutal end to the fight. Holy shit! Choji hissed. And Naruto-kun. Hinata whispered in awe. All 3 pairs of eyes rested upon Naruto, blood-spattered as he was and looking like he was spoiling for more. Distantly, it occurred to the blonde that none of the 3 had actually seen someone killed before, let alone killed someone themselves. The dead bodies didn't affect him, his sense of squeamishness died along with Sabuza when he had splattered the Jonin's brain matter across the bridge in Wave Country. "Now isn't the time for staring," Kurenai scolded. "Get a hold of yourselves, we're not out of here just yet. Hinata, how's our route?" "See clear, sensei. We're less than 600 meters from the northern gate, and there is only one man guarding the exit," Hinata said. "H's chakra levels indicate a likely JJ Jonin." The red-eyed Jonin sighed. All right then. Leave this one to me. Naruto, I want you to stay out of this fight unless absolutely necessary, is that clear?" Kurenai asked, serious red eyes that reminded the blonde of the Sharingan boring into his own. "Clear, sensei," said Naruto, curtly. He wasn't about to bum rush a Jonin unless absolutely necessary. "Good, stay alert, though. You're my immediate backup if this goes south," she cautioned. "Yes, sensei." Night vision will restrict his sight to about 200 to 250 meters in each direction, so you three will halt at 300. She pointed to indicate Team 8. "I will cloak us in a genjutsu to hide us from sight, but stay out of range either way. Naruto, you will press up at about 100 meters behind me. Now, I don't expect the illusion to hold for long, so a secondary sensory overload will hit him when it dispels. That should buy about 3 to 7 more seconds to work with. If, after that, he's still alive, Naruto, you will break in as a diversion and nothing more. I'll be able to handle him after that." "Am I clear?" she asked. A chorus of nods met her. "Good." The 5 of them ghosted forward invisibly, with the 300-yard mark coming at a signal from Hinata. Naruto paused with Team 8 for a few moments as Kurenai continued forward, before following it yet another signal from the Hyuga heiress. The blonde matched her pace easily, maintaining the 100-meter gap without effort. The plan was sound, better than sound. It was rock solid for something thrown together on the fly, with the 2 genjutsu seeming almost foolproof in theory. And yet, Naruto was still nervous. Maybe it was just the thought of trying to tackle yet another opponent well outside of his skill range, but it was more than just that. He had a bad feeling that he couldn't place, and no amount of mental reassurance would make it go away. He pushed it down, however, when the moon broke through the overcast night and the limited light revealed Kurenai steadily advancing on the Jonin's position. Maintaining his distance comfortably, Blue Eye squinted in the dark to behold a man of average height, hands loose at his sides, clad in gray fatigues and a matching flak vest. A dark Hittite lay across his forehead, the metal gleaming in the moonlight while the fabric contrasted sharply with the pale, almost pasty white skin of the man's face. Yellow eyes with slit pupils stared into the night impassively, reminding Naruto far too much of the Kyuubi for his own comfort. Time seemed to stand still for a split second as Naruto's blue orbs met yellow pupils that seemed to peer right through him. The man's lips twitched, and Naruto suddenly knew what was about to happen an instant before it did. The blonde Genin's mouth opened in a warning that was far too late. At the same time Kurenai lunged at the still motionless Jonin, kunai in position to eviscerate the sentry. Chakra rushed to Naruto's legs and exploded outward in the most overpowered shunshin of his young life as the telltale feeling of an egg being broken over his head heralded the immediate collapse of Kurenai's illusion. Naruto moved faster than he ever had before, his speed eating away at the 100-meter gap in hundredths of seconds, but he was still 20 meters away when the Jonin struck. As fast as a snake, one fist met Kurenai's neck before the Konoha Kunoichi had a chance to comprehend that her illusion had failed, before the man's other hand divested her of her kunai and buried it in her stomach in one smooth motion. A look of pure, unadulterated boredom flitted across the Jonin's face as Kurenai's lips parted in a silent "oh," and a thrust kick to her breast sent her speeding towards Naruto. The blonde hopped lightly, intercepting Kurenai's flight path and catching her with a hard exhale. Naruto dropped to the ground almost silently, quickly surveying the damage the kunai had done. As he examined his instructor's injury, he was peripherally aware of Team 8 sprinting towards him, but paid it no heed. The Jonin had left the kunai buried in Kurenai's abdomen, and Naruto thanked whatever divine power there might have been that the man had done so. The blow seemed to miss just about all of the vital points in the area, but Kurenai still would have been at serious risk of bleeding out had the blade been removed. Instead of true relief, however, Naruto only felt more dread for their situation. The strike had been deliberate, and if the man was good enough to detect Kurenai's discreet illusion, dispel it without being harmed by the sensory overload, and then reverse her ambush as effortlessly as he had, he wouldn't have failed to kill his would-be assassin unless he hadn't wanted to. And that meant that Naruto and Team 8 had just become his playthings. Konoha Shinobi, the man whispered in a low, deceptively feminine voice. I haven't encountered Konoha Shinobi in quite some time. What a disappointment. A pretty little jonin and 4 genin. The man's eyes widened, though in anticipation rather than surprise. Though, a Hyuga, and a Kimichi, an Aburame, and Uzumaki Naruto. A devilish smirk that put the fear of God into Naruto split the jonin's face. This might be fun after all. His heartbeat deafening him, Naruto took a deep breath to steady himself, and then took another. His hearing slightly restored, he addressed Team 8 behind him. Guys, I'm gonna break us out. When I do, grab Kurenai and run, and don't touch the kunai, whatever you do. Don't argue, he said quickly to cut off any protests. Don't even think. Just run for the southern border. I'll be right behind you. Whether it was the utter terror of the moment, or some quality in his voice, the 3 genin behind him didn't argue, and Chuji shuffled slightly to better pick Kurenai up when Naruto initiated the breakout. The jonin was laughing at them. You have a plan, he cackled delightedly. How magnificent. I'm afraid, however, that you will not be going anywhere. For kunai appeared in his hands, and the 4 genin were suddenly suffocating under the most powerful killing intent they'd ever felt as dozens of shuriken and kunai peppered their frozen limbs. Blood spurted, flesh was rent, and the genin's stomachs turned over as the sight of their own deaths by projectiles played out in front of their eyes. Naruto couldn't even blink, let alone breath, as what felt like a million needles were stabbing him all at the same time while his chest was compressed past the breaking point. This was it, he was going to die. He, Uzumaki Naruto, was about to be brought low by some Otogekure jonin before he had accomplished anything. Before he had even made chunin. A painful warmth was spreading through his limbs as his fatalistic thoughts hammered through his head, before the deafening sound of his own heartbeat silenced them, and the poisonously red image of a roaring fox obscured his vision. Time slowed as his mind flashed to his first encounter with the demon fox, and suddenly the jonin's killing intent wasn't so suffocating anymore. It was nothing before the Kyuubi's pure malice and malevolence, and the devilish smirk was nothing more than a joke of an expression on the visage of a pasty-faced pretender. The phantom pain vanished, the suffocating killing intent dissipated, and the pale jonin stood behind it all with 4 kunai hurtling through the air towards the genin's chests. Naruto acted on instinct before his mind had fully caught up to the situation at hand. 2 clawed hands formed a cross-shaped seal in front of his face, and the distinctive sound of shadow clones popping into existence filled the silent night. 3 puffs of smoke obscured the jonin's vision of the genin he had targeted, and the sight of corporeal, black-clad blondes appeared for but a moment before dissipating as the throwing knives found their marks. The devilish smirk already on the man's face widened, contumelious satisfaction peeling pale lips back to reveal slightly pointed teeth. So Sarutobi-sensei's dirty little secret can think for itself. Wonderful. Naruto paid the smile no heed as he drew a brace of 4 kunai with his left hand, while forming a half-ram seal with his right. A spear of killing intent was hurled at the smirking jonin, causing the man to recoil in slight shock at its potency. The blonde allowed himself a single moment of satisfaction as his spur-of-the-moment idea paid dividends, and the frozen genin jerked back to their senses. The genjutsu had been broken as the man lost his concentration. You guys alright? He queried, voice shaking involuntarily even as the Kyuubi's energy continued to filter into his system. Yes, Naruto-san, came Shino's predictable response, even if Naruto could detect the obvious fear in the boy's tone. And Naruto-ke-kun, why your ch chakra? Hinata gasped. Naruto didn't spare time for a curse as he realized that the Hyuga's Byakugan must have been activated, and could therefore see the distinctly inhuman chakra coursing through Naruto's coils. Nothing to worry about, he bit out quickly, unperturbed about his secret getting out. He had bigger things to worry about. You guys remember the plan? He asked, silently thankful for the jonin's continued lack of movement. The man obviously thought them so far beneath his notice to allow them their moment of hushed conversation. Even as he was doing so, Naruto felt the stirrings of an irrational anger begin to take hold. How dare he not take me seriously? Came the feral, bijou-induced thought. Three muttered yes sounded from behind Naruto, and the blonde exhaled quietly. The man wasn't likely about to let Team 8 waltz right past him as he dealt with Naruto, so he'd have to break them out the hard way. He was confident that Team 8 would follow his lead, but, for the first time since his first meeting with Zabuza, he was less confident in himself to be able to pull them through. A flush of chakra derailed the thought before it could take hold in him, and Naruto readied himself by sheathing his 4 kunai in a combination of futon chakra and the foxes. He would only have one shot at this, and he would need his anchors. The Jonin nodded as he watched Naruto call upon his elemental chakra. Such heightened control in one so young, impressive. So, he finally hissed. You've dispelled my genjutsu. An impressive feat indeed, but then I'm sure you're just full of surprises, isn't that right, Naruto-kun? An involuntary shiver coursed through him at the tone of familiarity, but it went ignored, as did the rest of the words, as Naruto threw one kunai directly at his own feet, before hurling the other 3 at the Jonin, blocking his path in a staggered flight path. A Kaige Bunshin appeared as the blonde made yet another cross-shaped seal, and it sprinted at the pale man, knuckle knives drawn. The Jonin spared a split second of consideration for the flight path of the blades, smiling openly at the more advanced tactic the Jinchuriki employed, before twisting himself around and out of the path of the kunai in an inhuman display of flexibility. His tongue flapped out of his mouth happily as the sight of 4 stunned genin met his eyes, before he refocused on the clone bearing down on him. Only it wasn't there anymore, replaced instead by one of the kunai he had just dodged. His eyes widened even as his spine seemed to cease to exist for a moment, allowing him to bend further than 90 degrees at the waist to avoid being rent in two by the clone behind him. A kunai of his own found its way to his hand to deal with the annoyance, only to find nothing but air as he slashed out. The sight of yet another of the boy's knives filled his vision, and a cackle escaped his lips as he turned to face the clone once more. Kawarimi with a kunai, the Jonin thought. Well-timed and a nearly instantaneous method of covering short distances, impressive indeed. I wonder if he knows just how well he imitates Namake's old habits. The Jonin's hand, the one not holding a kunai, darted out faster than the clone could react, catching the incoming knife mid-strike and simultaneously knocking it to the ground. Moving faster than Naruto's eye could track, the Jonin struck out in a jab with his kunai-laden hand, impaling the clone through the throat and watching in satisfaction as it puffed out of existence. But, he muttered to himself, the low hiss unheard by the genin, Kawarimi is no Horatian. He turned back to the 4 genin, 3 snakes creeping out of his sleeves in preparation, half expecting to see the real Uzumaki Naruto charging him, only to be blindsided as a crimson corona of power, so bright it lit the countryside for miles, erupted. Chakra senses going haywire at the explosion of malevolent demonic chakra, and nearly blinded by the mere sight of it, the pale Otonin had no time to react as Naruto, heedless of all else, barreled into him with the all-kinetic force of the maelstrom he was named for. The blonde, fully cognizant, let the poisonous chakra go to work eroding flesh and bone as he held the pale man in a stranglehold. Red eyes met yellow for a single, suspended moment before Naruto pressed his advantage brutally, a crimson-colored, bubbling hand of chakra extending from his arm swatting the Jonin into a nearby building in a devastating hammer blow. Slitted eyes spared the building a glance as the man plowed through stone and wood like a bullet, dust exploding out as the framework collapsed upon itself. A split second was all the boy allowed himself before he enacted a lightning-fast Kawarimi that brought him back to the first kunai he had lodged in the ground. Run, he roared at the stunned forms of Team 8, even as he forced the Kyuubi's chakra back down to a boil beneath the surface of his skin. The residual killing intent echoed through his vocal cords regardless, and fight-or-flight syndrome took over in the minds of his 3 comrades. All 3 took off through the north gate at a full sprint before heading directly southeast, leaving Naruto to hastily collect Kurenai in his arms and tear off after them. The combination of the Kyuubi's chakra and adrenaline proved potent, and Naruto easily managed to power himself parallel to Team 8 in the open plains of rice field country. He kept the 3 genin slightly ahead of him, however, knowing that if the remaining Oto ninja decided to chase them that he would need to be the first line of defense. Team 8 had already proven themselves to be greenhorn genin, unaccustomed to true combat, and would drop like flies in a running battle. A shock of pain split his skull for a moment as he finally managed to wrestle the Kyuubi's chakra back down, and a wave of fatigue swept over him. He stumbled as exhaustion made itself known, nearly growling in frustration at the aftereffects of using the Kyuubi's chakra. Damned fox, he cursed. Even with his own reserves nearly full, he still felt like he had run all the way from Kumobakure to Konoha in one go. Even so, Naruto righted himself through force of will, and resigned himself to rationing the fox's chakra so as to keep himself moving, inwardly cursing himself and the fox itself for making him use the instrument of his exhaustion to fight it. He'd likely end up passed out for days after this whole mess was over. If they got out alive, that was. That thought spurred him on, and his eyes bled from blue to deep purple, his teeth and nails lengthened, and his whisker marks deepened ever so slightly as the Biju's chakra coursed through him once more. With a single push, he regained his place at the back of Team 8's sprint to the border, noticing idly that the three had slowed considerably as they regained their wits. It was a good thing too, as at their previous pace they would have passed out halfway through the countryside. The group crested a hill, coming to an involuntary halt as the sight of a massive body of water shimmered in the moonlight in front of them. A sigh of relief escaped Naruto's chapped lips. "Follow it around," he grunted, his voice sounding like gravel due to the influence of the Kyuubi's chakra. 3 pairs of startled eyes shifted to him. What? Choji whispered, as if he had forgotten that Naruto had been running behind them in the first place. Wrapped up in the terror of the moment, Naruto mused distantly, they probably hadn't thought of him at all. "Follow it around," he repeated, making an effort to soften his voice. "It didn't work. This lake is the start of the river that flows into the valley of the end. If we follow it around, we'll reach Fire Country's border in a few hours." But first he started, as all of Team 8 had begun to move off. He placed Kurenai's unconscious form on the ground. "I'll need some help with Kurenai." It was as if a veil of blindness had been lifted off the 3 genin of Team 8 at the mention of their sensei. All of a sudden, panic returned in full force, only enhanced by the fact that their sensei, the one person they had been counting on in case of a situation like this, was lying unconscious with a blade sheath in her gut. "Kurenai-sensei!" Choji exclaimed in shock. The heavy boy's breathing quickened almost immediately as he stumbled backwards. His feet caught on a piece of gravel and he tumbled to the ground unceremoniously. The disorientation seemed to do him a spot of good, however, as the moment his back hit the ground, his breathing calmed, his mind no longer focusing on the prone form of his sensei. The other 2 weren't so fortunate. Hinata's already pale cheeks became even more so, her eyes widened, and she stood stock still staring vacantly down at the jonin. The gaze seemed to pass right through the dark-haired woman in front of her, however, seeing instead some phantom of her mind. While Shino looked to be his usual stoic self, Naruto could see the boy's body was far too tense, and a faint buzzing noise that the blonde had been hearing since the flight from Shintoshi was getting truly deafening. Caught off guard by Team 8's reactions, Naruto flinched back, uncomprehending of the raw emotion playing out before him. "What are they? Why are they?" It was only when Hinata sunk to her knees, hugging herself tightly around the chest and whimpered, "Mother," that snapped Naruto out of his daze. "Hey," he barked, his voice, already a growl, amplified by the corrosive chakra running through him. Killing intent rolled off of him, flooding the immediate vicinity and grabbing Team 8's attention like a slap to the face. "Get a hold of yourselves. You're running around like a bunch of Greenhorn Academy students. We're not out of this shit yet, and all of you panicking like a bunch of fucking kids is gonna get us all killed." The growling dressing down hadn't done much for Team 8's rapidly fraying nerves, but it seemed to snap them out of their collective stupor. "What do we need to do, Naruto-san?" Shino asked, his voice quiet. The fact that he deferred to Naruto's leadership spoke volumes, and unknowingly had Choji and Hinata giving more weight to his words. The blonde sighed, raking a clawed hand through his hair. His own nerves weren't helping the situation. He was constantly fighting himself to keep from snapping at the 3 genin in front of him, not to mention the consistent pounding of blood in his ears courtesy of the Kyuubi's chakra. He was itching for a fight and he knew it, but was powerless to stop the urge. He could push it down, though. "First off, Kurenai needs to be patched up some. Anyone who might have chased us from the town seems to have given up by now, so we have some time to work." A thought struck the genin suddenly, and he turned to Hinata. How long can you keep your eyes activated? He asked, voice filled with something like hope. The heiress looked to her feet. Ayano, only a few minutes at a time, and Naruto-kun. The blonde refrained from cursing sulfurously at the girl's tiny chakra reserves. That's fine for now, Hinata. Can you activate them now? The girl nodded once, and chakra pulsed outward with a hand seal and a muttered Byakugan. There's no one within 1,000 meters, Naruto-kun, Hinata stated, picking up on his train of thought. Good, Naruto muttered absently, his mind filing away her range. Okay. First things first, we've got to get this kunai out of her. He turned violet eyes on the group. Do any of you have anything that'll help clotting? Bandages can only do so much. Choji looked pensive for a second, his eyes unconsciously flickering back and forth between Naruto and his sensei, before shaking his head in the negative. My clan's pills only deal with chakra output, he muttered. Shino, predictably, said nothing, but turned hidden eyes to Hinata. The girl in question blushed and looked down, pushing her fingers together in her usual show of uncertainty. Ano, I have a C cream that helps wounds close by directing CH chakra to the injury, B, but I'm not sure it will W work properly, she stuttered. Aren't you the Hyuga heiress? Grow a spine. Naruto thought harshly, the Kyuubi's natural malice amplifying his impatience with their situation. Now isn't the time for your insecurities. That'll have to do, was all he grunted as he unwrapped the excess bandages from around his calves. Get the cream and coat these in it. We'll use them to help stop the bleeding. Hopefully it'll buy us some time. The blonde passed his bandages to Hinata and Shino, who began applying the cream liberally. He motioned to Choji. When we start moving again, I'll need you to carry her. You're easily the strongest of us physically, and I'll have to deal with any threats against us if and when they appear. You guys won't be much use in a fight right now, went unspoken, but the heavy-set boy seemed to get the message, if the look of grim determination on his face was any indication. Got it, Naruto. Good. Are you guys finished with the bandages? He asked to Shino and Hinata. Just about, Naruto-san, was the bespectacled boy's reply. We've a few more left. Hurry it up, Naruto ordered. We don't have too much time and I don't want to linger. Even as he spoke, the Jinchuriki moved to start removing the kunai from Kurenai's abdomen gingerly. He grasped the blade lightly, inwardly thanking the heavens that he had paid attention in those first aid lessons at the academy, and pulled directly opposite the angle of entry so as to do no further damage to the blood vessels. A wince passed across his face as the jonin moaned quietly in her unconsciousness. The blonde wondered again at the enemy jonin's mindset as he had stabbed Kurenai, silently thankful for making his job easier. The man must have been arrogant to the extreme to purposefully leave a wound so treatable, so confident in himself as to think he would easily be able to dispatch the genin. Then again, Naruto mused as he stemmed the blood flow with the bandages from Kurenai's own dress, it likely wasn't a far-fetched assumption. The man obviously hadn't counted on running into a Jinchuriki. Get those bandages over here, he directed, using one hand to apply pressure to the wound while simultaneously cutting away pieces of Kurenai's red and white dress with a kunai. Hold this down, Choji, he ordered the Akimichi, passing the blood-soaked cloth to him. The boy took over with a grimace, looking more than a little sick at the prospect. Both hands free, Naruto removed the rest of the fabric with ease from around the jonin's abdomen, and discarded the blood-soaked fabric. Naruto-san, Shino spoke from behind him, cream-lathered bandages in hand. The blonde only grunted in acknowledgement, taking the white, slippery strips of cloth without prompting. Lift that, he ordered Choji, gesturing to the bloody cloth. The boy pulled it off and backed away hastily, all too eager to step away from the bleeding woman, inadvertently leaving Naruto to bandage Kurenai on his own. The whiskered genin didn't even bother to sigh as the three genin kept their distance, slipping one hand under the jonin gently as he wrapped the cream-soaked bandages around her middle. Sticky life water ran down his clawed hands as they repeatedly passed over Kurenai's well-toned stomach muscles, the dark liquid contrasting fiercely with the almost creamy tone of the woman's skin that was paling far too quickly. The job was finished swiftly, and Naruto fastened the not-too-tight pieces of cloth to the pretty jonin with a liberal helping of adhesive tape. He stepped back, shaking his hands and rubbing them unconsciously on his shorts, and observed his hasty handiwork. It would have to do, he decided, turning back to Team 8. That'll have to do it. Choji, pick her up, we're leaving, Naruto directed. We've lingered here far too long. We can be in Fire Country in a few hours, but only if we hurry, he growled. The 3 genin of Team 8 nodded resolutely in response, and Choji gingerly lifted his sensei into his arms bridal style. The 4 genin followed the edge of the lake for nearly a full half hour before it turned into a river, the sound of running water and the nearly silent crunch of their hurried footsteps nearly deafening to their ears in the silence of the night. The foursome was forced to stop multiple times during the trek. As Choji had to readjust his grip often, and neither Shino nor Hinata had the stamina to keep on at their pace for hours at a time. It was during one of these stops, for Choji this time, just before dawn, that Hinata activated her Byakugan as per Naruto's order. Milky white eyes widened in terror for a split second, and Naruto knew dread. T-12 figures approaching from the northwest. Hinata gasped. Curses exploded out of Naruto's mouth that would have made even a battle-hardened shinobi take a step back. He took a deep breath to steady himself, even as the sound of his own pounding heartbeat began its ritualistic echo. All right, he began, here's the plan. We're gonna take Kurenai and get across the river. I assume you know the water walking exercise. 3 hesitant shakes of heads met him and the blonde only barely kept himself from exploding. Shit. Okay, then we'll need to keep on around the river until it thins. Then we'll cross. Once we're over there, we'll need to sprint along the riverbank until you reach the Valley of the End, just like we planned. Once we're in Fire Country we can contact one of the border patrols. The obvious entryways are gonna be swamped with patrols at this time of day, so we'll need to get to one as fast as possible, you hear? Choji nodded resolutely, already reaching to pick up Kurenai. Hinata was tripping over herself in her haste to gather her belongings, while Shino directed his steady gaze at Naruto. The blonde got the impression that the bug user could see right through him. You won't be with us, he said quietly, having picked up on Naruto's unspoken plan. It wasn't a question. A sardonic smile split Naruto's face. I'll hold them off for a few minutes before breaking out. I'll be right behind you, he said in a whisper. You'll need our help dash. No, Naruto cut across the boy quietly, his voice eliciting a wince. He paid it no mind. Kurenai needs medical attention ASAP, we don't have time to stop and fight a taxing battle. And if I come with you and they catch us, which they will, we'll all get killed in a running battle. This way, Kurenai will get back to Fire Country with only one of us playing catch-up. Shino paused, uncomfortable and in obvious thought. That chakra you used. Naruto grimaced. Like I said, I'll be right behind you. The bespectacled boy nodded once, firmly. I will keep them moving. I know, Naruto said. He addressed the rest of the group. Let's move out. Chakra revitalizing their limbs, Team 8 plus Naruto took off at a sprint around the riverbank. Naruto stopped after a few steps, watching silently as his comrades continued their sprint, 2/3 of them so focused that they were completely unaware of him. Turning, he began his backtrack slowly, taking measured steps as he focused on filtering the Kyuubi's chakra through his coils. Purple eyes bled fully into crimson, and Naruto thought he could almost hear a growl of satisfaction come from the beast. He paid it no mind, however, as the slight rustling of branches heralded the approach of the Otonin. Pointed teeth became bared in a feral snarl of rage as boiling red chakra bubbled out of and across the surface of Naruto's skin. The now familiar warmth of the fox's demonic chakra washed over him fully as the visible life essence settled itself in a cloak around him. One single tail-like appendage sprouted from behind him and began waving back and forth. The 12 ninja, clad in all black body gear and face masks, broke through the foliage at a run, only to halt abruptly as they caught sight of the demonic vision waiting for them at the edge of the water. The Konoha genin noted, with a feral satisfaction, that fear was quickly replacing confidence on their faces. Stunned, the men looked at one another in shock, and it was all the prompting Naruto needed. Formerly restrained murderous intent poured forth, every ounce of it directed directly at the shinobi, who froze. Naruto spared no thought for the men in front of him as instinct took over and a haze of red blurred his vision. Dust and rocks exploded upward behind him as he tore towards the 12 motionless shinobi faster than the eye could track. A red blur was the only sight that greeted the men as Naruto dropped to all fours and covered the remaining distance in 2 bounds. Claws outstretched, Naruto barreled into the first of the 12 without ceremony, nails finding purchase in the soft flesh of the man's throat. Blood spurted as the claws left 2-inch rents in the skin, and the man dropped like a sack with his head half removed. The unleashed Jinchuriki didn't so much as glance back as the body hit the ground, having extended the single tail into a 7-foot whip that bisected 3 otonin as he spun in a full circle. 4 shinobi were lying dead after less than a second before the other 8 reacted. Acting quickly, the first brought his hands together in a seal sequence, causing a rock fissure to erupt where Naruto was standing. The cloaked blonde reacted faster than the man could have ever anticipated, deftly jumping out of the spike's way, before exploding forward and grabbing the offender in a lightning-fast, crushing chokehold that collapsed the shinobi's windpipe in an instant. Capitalizing on the Jinchuriki's momentary pause, a second Oto ninja leapt forward and made for a stab at Naruto's exposed back. Inhuman reflexes jerked Naruto to the left, and the knife buried itself hill deep in his right shoulder. The boy's roar of pain split the air, and Naruto dropped his quarry to the ground. Coiling his body, the blonde jabbed his clawed left hand into the chest of the otonin who had stabbed him before the man had a chance to react. The feral genin paid the blood running down his arm and rivulets no heed as the dragged the screaming shinobi to meet his eyes. Slitted eyes the color of fresh blood met terrified Hazel for a single, suspended moment before Naruto slapped the man into a tree 20 meters away with enough force to crack the trunk. It had taken 4 men dying in the span of a second to galvanize the otonin into action, and it took 6 men and 2 for the rest to realize that they were well and truly fucked. The first who tried to run was cut down as Naruto almost casually ripped the kunai stuck in his shoulder from its resting place, hurling the blade through the back of the man's head in one motion. The second who broke for his life had his organs liquefied as an arm of pure, demonic chakra snatched him around the waist and squeezed. The third man didn't make it a step before the Jinchuriki had swept him into a tree with a wave of his arm. The fourth made it a full step before stopping suddenly, staring with unblinking eyes down at the crimson, bubbling hand of chakra that was extending out from his chest. The fifth man had resigned himself to death, and was neatly decapitated by a blood-colored whip that had been meant for his chest as he fell to his knees. The final otonin made it to the tree line as Naruto was distracted, but it was for naught as the Jinchuriki fell to all fours and powered himself into a flying tackle that sent the two tumbling to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Quickly using his weight to pin the man, Naruto held him down by the throat while he raised his second claw in preparation for a strike that would brutally decapitate the shinobi. It was only when the crimson eyes of the Ninetales met pale blue eyes that could have been his own that Naruto realized that the man's mask had been ripped from his face. Terror-shrouded eyes stared back at him from a face that could have been his own a few years down the road. Shocked at the raw fear he saw, Naruto stumbled back from the boy's body into the nearest tree trunk, the Kyuubi's cloak receding. The genin slumped to the ground as his eyes bled back into the natural blue of his father, vacantly taking in the destruction of his own making as the death of the Oto ninjas played out before him. Overwhelmed at the sight of the nearly dozen dead, Naruto's gag reflex reared its head violently and his stomach emptied itself in one go. Disoriented, the Jinchuriki blinked and rolled his head to right himself as his nausea began to subside. "What have I done?" he gasped, throat raw. Quiet though the words were, they seemed to echo around the new graveyard as if the blonde had shouted them to the heavens. Self-disgust ripped through him as each and every one of his brutal, inhuman kills flashed before his eyes, and his head dropped to his hands as sobs threatened to rack his body. A gurgle broke his train of self-hatred, and blue eyes peered out from behind clenched fingers at the stirring body of the 12th otonin. Caked blood covered the teenager's throat, and Naruto realized with a start that the Kyuubi's chakra had completely eaten through the flesh and blood vessels, leaving the barely alive shinobi to suffocate in a pool of his own fluids. A sob finally broke from his throat as he recalled the ninja's young face, only a few years older than his own, shrouded in absolute terror at the hellish vision of death that had torn through his comrades. The self-hatred returned in full force as Naruto remembered the clear blue eyes, so like his own, that had stared back at him once the mask had been torn from the boy's face. And yet, at the same time, 3 other faces flashed before him, the faces of his comrades in Team 8. The memory of their terror at the utterly unfair situation they had stumbled into passed before Naruto's eyes, and the recollection of their panic at Kurenai's condition stirred the already churning pot of emotion in the Jinchuriki. It was the memory of Hinata, broken, collapsed and hugging herself, that convinced him. This had been necessary. The 12 Otonin had had no idea what they were sprinting into when they broke through the trees by the riverbank, but they had been ready and willing to slaughter the 4 genin and their instructor in much the same way that Naruto had done to them. Team 8 was green, utterly unprepared for the harsh realities of the shinobi world where clans were purged and children were sentenced to death for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Before tonight they had never even seen a dead body, much less taken a life. They would have dropped like flies, cut down without thought or remorse by the kill squad. It was kill or be killed, and Naruto knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that all 12 of the would-be assassins wouldn't have hesitated to cut him or his comrades down. In the end, he had decimated 12 enemy shinobi to preserve the lives of 5, his own included. He had protected his teammates, his comrades in arms. He had done his duty. He had done his duty the same way Asuma would have. The same way his father would have. Self-disgust gave way to a calm, cold acceptance of his actions. He was a shinobi, and shinobi killed, and died, in the line of duty. It was a truth universally accepted by those in their world who lived long enough to rack up a body count, and it was a truth that Naruto had never truly understood until now. Even the sudden death of Asuma hadn't completely reinforced that fact. He was a shinobi, and he had done his duty. As a direct result of his actions, he and Team 8 now had a better chance of seeing another sunrise. 12 men had to die to ensure that his comrades would escape, and, as Naruto rose, kunai in hand to put the final Otogekure shinobi out of his misery, he found that he could live with that. A flash of moonlight glinted off the black metal of the knife as Naruto delivered the coup de grace, and the once again blue-eyed boy turned his back on the riverbank graveyard and strode off into the night to rejoin his team. He didn't look back. Exhaustion pounded a steady beat through her body, her heart a drumbeat in the near-total silence of the clearing. She could say with complete certainty that this was the most tired she had ever been in her life. Her arms could have been made of lead, while her legs might as well have been made of jelly, for all the weight they could hold. Her head felt like it weighed 30 pounds as she leaned back into the trunk of the tree she rested against, the dull thump of her hair on the bark echoing in her mind. Yamanaka Ino was tired, deathly so, but she refused to let the medics sedate her for the journey back to Konoha. Not yet, at least. Yamato-sensei had tried to convince her to accompany the first of the medical 2 teams back to Konoha with Kiba, but she had held her ground. Kiba, who had taken a kunai to the back in a skirmish before Yamato had found them, was in stable condition and was only being taken back to Konoha as a precautionary measure. She, however, was mostly unharmed, save for small flesh wounds, and needed nothing more than field medicine. With nothing impairing her save for exhaustion, Ino wasn't about to be carted off to Konoha without knowing exactly what was happening. Not with her friends still out there. Not with Naruto still out there. Not that he'll want to see me, she thought morosely, a spear of self-disgust ripping through her. Not with how I've been treating him. It was truly amazing how nearly getting killed, not to mention waiting to find out if your friends had been killed, managed to put things in perspective. Her sardonic chuckle broke the silence of the clearing, causing the patrolling ANBU to perk up. Ino didn't care, though, wrapped up in her thoughts as she was. She and Kiba, really, had been treating Naruto like shit stuck on the bottom of their sandals ever since Yamato had become their sensei. And, if she was honest with herself, it was only because he had decided to learn from a man she only saw as a replacement for their real sensei. It was a childish reason by anyone's standards, and Ino shook her head at the sheer pettiness of herself and Kiba. Unbidden, Naruto's words from their fight drifted back to her. I'm not. Shit happened and I'm trying to stop it from happening again. I'm trying to get stronger. You two fucking around, acting like a couple of spoilt brats back in the academy, puts all of us at risk. What happens next time round, and there will be a next time, when shit hits the fan, huh? When the chips are on the fucking table and there's no one there to bail us out? I'll tell you what happens, we die. I'm not about to let that happen, and if that means that I have listened to a guy who's being put in as a replacement for Asuma, and an experienced jonin at that, so be it. Why'd you have to be right all the time, Naruto? Ino asked the dead air in a whisper. The boy had been dead on the money, as usual, and Ino was left shaking her head at her own stupidity. She had let herself be blinded by loss, and had pushed away the one person she knew she would have been able to count on in any situation. And now he was out in the wild on his own, likely fighting his way through Odonin just to get back. Snap out of it, Ino. He's got Kurenai-sensei with him. He'll be fine. She raked a hand through her loose hair, flecks of blood from her fingernails leaving trails in her sweaty, grimy locks. 4 months ago, she would have been sprinting back to Konoha simply for the prospect of a shower. Now, she waited with bated breath for the return of her teammate, caring for nothing else. Ino vowed never to let her fellow blonde out of her sight if, when she fiercely corrected herself, Naruto returned. She couldn't quite pinpoint the moment in time she had first started nursing an affection for her teammate, but she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that she didn't think of him as just a friend or a teammate, though he certainly fell into both categories. He was Naruto. That was all that really mattered. It was in this moment of clarity that Yamato found her. "They've been spotted," he said in an opening that startled the blonde genin so much that she nearly jumped. The girl regained her bearings quickly, however, focusing tired aquamarine eyes on the brown orbs of her sensei. A patrol caught up to them as they were nearing the Valley of the End. They will be there in less than half an hour. Ino blinked, her mind flashing to a scene of blood, sweat, and pure desperation. Her tanto was past the point of being slippery, sticky as its handle was from the now dried blood. The dead body of a nameless, faceless Odonin laid face down less than 5 feet from her, but she barely even noticed the corpse. A simple sliced throat had downed the assassin, the motion easy from under the cover of her genjutsu. She turned her head to the whimpering Kiba next to her, watching detachedly as he tested the array of bandages that covered the back of his right shoulder. Akamaru cradled to his chest, he met her eyes with a defiant nod, letting her know that her hasty handiwork would hold. The slight breath of relief that left her lips barely touched the dead air before the telltale feeling of an egg being cracked over her head told her that her double-layered illusion had just been shattered. Ino whipped around, her blonde hair flying and an expression of horror etched upon her pretty face as the figures of 6 masked shinobi dropped to the ground opposite her and Kiba. The expression remained as crimson blood sprayed violently across her pale visage, her eyes fixed upon the sight of multiple wooden stakes protruding from the chests of her would-be assassins. 2 branches stuck out of each man's chest, one penetrating the heart, another the liver, in a terrifyingly thorough execution. The stakes receded abruptly, and each man dropped like a puppet without its strings. The sound of thumps filled Ino's ears as she raised shocked eyes to meet the icy brown orbs of her sensei, the man perched like a hawk on top of the opposite roof. "Are you sure?" she stuttered, trying to regain her bearings from the mental flash. Were she more alert, she would have wondered at the stupidity of asking a jonin whether he was sure about information he had received from ANBU. The brown-haired former ANBU showed no expression at the unnecessary question, opting to answer with a simple yes and motioning for Ino to follow him. The blonde genin scrambled to her feet hastily, fighting some small, residual dizziness from sitting for so long. "We're going to meet them," she said mostly to herself as her sensei took to the trees. The girl flooded her legs with chakra before doing the same, silently wishing for one of Kiba's always handy soldier pills to help deal with her exhaustion. The run to the valley was mostly a black blur to Ino, who only truly remembered anything thanks to one of the ANBU members running alongside her in Yamato. The woman had very nearly caught the blonde genin at one point, before wisely offering the girl a soldier pill from her own stores. "You should have returned to the village with your teammate," the kunoichi chastised once Ino had regained some energy. "My other teammate is still out there," the bond returned with a bit of vitriol, uncaring of her tone. "I'm not going anywhere until I know what's happened to him," she finished in a whisper, a note of pure terror entering her voice at the thought of Naruto not returning. "Stop that!" She screamed at herself, shaking her head in a futile attempt to clear her mind of fatalistic thoughts. The female ANBU next to her was silent for a few moments before Senpai mentioned that Uzumaki is in the company of Yuhi Kurenai and her team. Yuhi is a talented jonin, your teammate will be fine, the kunoichi soothed. Ino wasn't sure, the monotone of the woman's voice threw off her perception, but it almost seemed as if a note of pity entered the ANBU's voice at Ino's plight. The blonde nodded, shakily at first and then resolutely. Yeah, he'll be fine, she told herself. Ino contented herself with the knowledge that Naruto was in good hands with Kurenai and Team 8. Letting the soldier pill go to work, the Yamanaka powered herself through the trees and towards the valley of the end. Waiting for her was a scene that would forever be etched into her memory. The roar of the nearby waterfall drowned out most sound coming from her destination, but she still managed to hear the words of the head of the medical team that had been waiting for Team 8 at the border. Set her down now. Get those bandages off of her immediately, we need to repair the damage to the area ASAP, the head medic was shouting as Ino burst out of the tree line directly behind Yamato. Get me blood pills, people. She needs it, and badly. All of Ino's cushy visions of Kurenai steering Naruto to safety from the depths of Ricefields country imploded with the force of an explosive tag at the sight of the inky-haired jonin laid out on the ground, blood-soaked bandages being removed from her abdomen and medical personnel scrambling for supplies around her. One medic neatly sliced the bloody cloth away with a kunai, exposing a bleeding stab wound to the kunoichi's stomach, and Ino felt her heart drop to her feet. Visions of Asuma's head sailing skyward in a spray of blood flashed before her eyes as Ino beheld the tense scene on the riverbank, and the blonde girl clapped both hands over her eyes in a futile attempt to halt them. No. Ino breathed, panic wresting control of her thoughts. Her hands fell from her eyes as her head whipped about in an attempt to locate Naruto. Naruto, she all but screamed into the night, searching for any sign of her wayward teammate. This can't be happening. Not now, not him. Naruto, she screamed again, just as a heavy hand fell on her shoulder and startled her out of her panic. Calm down, girl, the female ANBU ordered, roughly slapping the blonde girl across the face, nearly sending her to the ground. Your teammate is fine. A simple jerk of her head drew Ino's gaze to the river. The remaining 3 genin of Team 8 were being carried over on the backs of ANBU operatives, while a 4th ANBU walked side by side with the final member of the mission. The surreal sight of Naruto striding along the surface of the river with an ANBU at his side caused Ino's eyes to widen as she took it in. In the moonlight, the damage done to Naruto's attire was far too easy to see. The black vest was torn, ripped, and even shredded in places. Off-color splotches spoke of blood, though Ino couldn't be sure if it was his own. Normally sunny blonde hair was dulled with grime, sweat, and blood. A single knuckle knife spun around his left index finger idly as Naruto made his unhurried way across the river, his steps measured, tired, yet confident. Blue eyes blazed from beneath the fringe of his matted hair, taking in everything at once with the sight of a true veteran. A confidence born of lives taken and defied fate stared out at the world, daring anyone to challenge him. 2 sets of blue eyes locked from across the river, and suddenly Naruto was right in front of her, having bypassed Team 8 and covered the distance in less than an eye blink. Ino had barely registered his presence in front of her before she had nearly tackled him, wrapping him in the tightest embrace she had ever given. Naruto, for his part, simply let it happen, gently returning the hug after the initial shock had worn off. I thought you were dead, Ino breathed into his chest, fighting back sobs of relief as her fatalistic thoughts and imaginings evaporated. Can't get rid of me that easily, Naruto grunted tiredly, slightly amused at the girl's reaction in spite of himself. Pushing him away briefly, Ino grasped Naruto about the shoulders and held him at arm's length, surveying him up close. From less than a yard apart, Ino could clearly see the damage done to Naruto from the night's skirmishes, not all of it immediately apparent even from up close. His body was shaking, trembling even, with pure, unadulterated exhaustion. Blue eyes, though blazing in their intensity, were shadowed, worn with the exertion that followed pinpoint focus for an extended time. Ino was no sensor, but the normal chakra output that Naruto usually radiated was nowhere to be felt, hinting at dangerously low reserves. At a glance, Naruto was ready for another 10 rounds against whatever shinobi he had doubtlessly cut down, looking every part the mythical knight in an epic. But, in truth, his body was ready to give out. Even so, he offered her a smile, subconsciously looking to reassure Ino that everything was, in fact, just fine. Ino, whose stomach was doing a series of acrobatics as she stared at her teammate, simply elected to encircle Naruto in her arms once more, fully believing that everything was, in fact, just fine.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.